Do you have any recommendations just for the standard whiskey connoisseurs out there?
Simsation Nation.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Simsation Nation. This is season 2, believe it or not. I can't believe I even got past an episode in the first season, but now we are on season 2, and it is absolutely blowing my mind. So the guest that I am bringing on is someone that I know I can have a really good dialogue with. One, because he's just an awesome person, but number 2 is because we have similar interests, and an interest that I like to share and talk about a lot is the subject of whiskey. And I'm going to show you guys my pajama pants for the first time, but I want to show my socks. My socks say, if you can read this, bring me some whiskey. If you can read this, bring me some whiskey. So I know, I know this is going to be extremely fun. In fact, I am, and as soon as I introduce this guest, you'll know why. I am drinking some Tennessee whiskey, some Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey. It says Jack Daniel's honey, but honey's not in it. I actually have some Jack Daniel's Tennessee apple that I'm going to try for the first time. I haven't tried it before. I'm going to try it for the first time on this episode. So without further ado, this gentleman who has really kind of been my guiding mentor, has kind of put me on the map. He's a retired colonel from the United States Air Force. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Cary Amburn to the show. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shooter. Glad to be part of it. Glad to be kicking off season 2. That's exciting, man.
That's right, season 2. So if I remember correctly, you are a Tennessee guy. Is that accurate?
I am a Tennessee guy.
Nice.
So born and raised in Atlanta, so I'm a dog guy. I don't get that too loud.
Go Dogs.
I was a young kid, moved back to Tennessee and moved back to my hometown where my parents grew up. And then, joined the Air Force, spent 30 years caravanning about, and back in Knoxville now. So we're back home.
Okay. At some point, I'm going to make my way, because I see the sign back there. It's very well lit. It's called the Squadron, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. At some point, I got to step foot into the actual Squadron, aside from doing this virtually. So, but for now, this is what we've got. We've got this virtual environment, and I want to make sure before we get hot and heavy into the subject of whiskey that I put out a personal disclaimer out there that I am not condoning everybody to go out there and get drunk and, destroy your kidneys and your livers and all that other good stuff. If it's something that you have a hobby for, you have an affinity for drinking whiskey, you just like the taste, you like the different types of whiskey, then this episode is for you. Again, if you don't drink, then don't drink. No big deal. Drink apple juice. That's just as good. All right.
I joke a lot about that, but I think that's probably the key thing is you should always do this in moderation. You should always do it responsibly. For me, this is about the social piece of connecting with people.
Absolutely.
And, sometimes, a nice whiskey in your hand helps that.
That's a fact. That's a fact. So before I get into some of the talking points that I have for you, I don't know if you have something in your hand or not. I'm just going to assume that you being in the Squadron and having an episode about whiskey, that you have something. So I want to toast to you, sir. And this is my apple. It smells very sweet. Apple Jack Daniel's. So here's to you. Cheers.
Cheers, brother.
Oh my God, that's very sweet. It's like dessert.
Yeah, so that's what. It's funny. You're drinking a Jack, as I'm drinking a Jack as well.
Is that Jack Gold?
So this is Jack Gold 27, probably one of my favorite whiskeys, just because it is a Tennessee whiskey. And the Jack Daniel's process and what have you, it turns out to be one of the best whiskeys that for the price point
sure.
and you can get, but it's a great whiskey.
I've had that one, and I will tell you, it's pretty good for the price for sure.
Yeah.
I had it for the first time, and I immediately went and found me a bottle. So on that note, I'd like to ask you, how did you develop your love for whiskey?
Yeah, so that's a great question because a lot of people kind of get into this and they discern, the flavors and the aromas and the taste. And mine started because I was in the Pentagon. and I worked in a very horrible job.
Oh my God, I'm headed to the Pentagon here in a few months, so I'm getting worried now.
I was at the end of my rope, and a good friend of mine, one particular day, we had been on a conference call. It didn't go well. The boss was not happy. It was just a typical day in the Pentagon. And he was a New Yorker from the North, I'll say. And he's like, Cary, I got something to fix your problem. And he reaches in his desk, and he pulls out my first taste of Scotch whiskey from Scotland, a Macallan cast strength whiskey.
Ooh.
And it was smooth. It had a great flavor. And I'm like, dude, what is this? He goes, well, it's whiskey. It's just Scotch. And that's on the all right, I gotta go get me a bottle of that. Well,
that's
that was
right.
about $110 bottle.
Oh, well, my goodness.
This was 2010. I was still, I think, in 05. And I'm like, yeah, Mama's not going to let me buy that.
I would say, as a person of a lower rank with the circle that I was hanging around with, I would come home and tell my lovely bride about all the different whiskeys that I had tried, and she was like, "Well, don't get too used to that. They're like 06s and everything."
I can understand, but that's a great point because a lot about whiskey in the category of whiskey. People get caught up in a name, they get caught up in certain things, and you can get a great whiskey for $40-50 a bottle. There are some great, you can take Scotch, you can get into Tennessee whiskey. There's bourbon, there's all kinds of different whiskeys that for a pretty decent price point you can. And I highly recommend. I do a Saturday routine. I hit the Total Wine every Saturday. They always have something on taste test.
Nice.
So find out a good variety of what's out there.
That reminds me of when I used to go to Sam's Club and try to get some of their free, samples. You get full on a Saturday. So I guess it's kind of similar at Total Wine too.
Exactly right.
So you mentioned something earlier, and this is education for all of us, myself included. You mentioned something about Scotch whiskey and things like that. So for those that don't know or maybe just don't understand, what is the difference, or is there a difference between Scotch, bourbon, whiskey? Like what is it? What is the difference?
So there is a difference, and I by no means am an expert. I used to be a big fan of the Game of Thrones, and the Tyrion, my favorite character. I drink and I know things. That's kind of my philosophy, right? I need a shirt, but really, whiskey is about taking a grain, a cereal grain, some kind of barley, wheat, rye, whatever, mashing it, grinding it, growing it, cooking it, fermenting, making alcohol, and then in that process of distillation, you end up with an alcohol. So really, they're all about the same. They're all made about the same way. Sometimes there's multiple different stills. There's multiple different grains. There's it gets really complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But, whiskey, if you say whiskey without an E, you're probably talking about Scotch because it's made in Scotland. That's how you get Scotch whiskey.
Right.
And typically, whiskey with an E is anything in the United States, other countries. It's just a variation of spelling. But there are, bourbon is by law in the United States has to be 51% corn. So that's what makes it a bourbon. There's all these different rules on it, but there's really, it's just a grain that's been cooked and fermented, and they go through a distilling process to pull out the alcohol. And I think they talk about the ingredients that go in these things. One of them is probably the most important is a good water, a base of water, because that's where your flavor comes in.
Right.
A grain, and then time. Putting a mineral or a spirit into a cask and getting some kind of aged liquor at the end. That's an important variable. But yeah, they're all about the same. I mean, whiskey, bourbon, they're all. Scotch is the same as pick your whiskey. India makes whiskey. They get whiskeys in Japan. They get whiskeys in Canada. So yeah, it's all about the same.
No, I like the education. Someone mentioned literally in the elevator one day, and he asked me something about the KY versus the KEY. He's like, well, and by that time I already had some whiskey, so I wasn't really listening to anything he had said, so I couldn't really remember. And so I want to have this recorded now, so I want to have that knowledge and education, just like when we go to wineries and we get all the education on wine and all the other good stuff. So I appreciate that.
There's a couple of great websites that I use just to kind of educate myself on how they get to, because a lot of people, you'll hear a lot of fancy people will talk about drinking. Well, I only drink single malt scotches because it's only got one grain in it. And while that's a fact, a single malt scotch is made from barley, but single in those phrases is meant to be a single distillery.
Oh, no kidding.
Single malt scotch, say the Balvenie single malt that comes from the Balvenie distillery, is because it comes from the Balvenie distillery. That's why it's a single malt scotch. And it's funny. People go, I won't drink blended scotches because they're not as good. Well, in actuality, a blended scotch is typically smoother because you're taking multiple distilleries, perhaps one from Balvenie and one from Macallan, and you blend it and you get an even better. So it's funny. A lot of people will ask about the neat versus rocks versus this.
Yeah.
And I think my answer is, how do you like it? That's how I like it. How do you? And I challenge people when we, if you come to the Squadron, my friend, if you'll come down here, Shooter.
Absolutely.
We'll walk around Scotland. We'll try all the different, because each area will have a different flavor profile. And you try it neat first, I always say, because neat will give you the just basic, here's what it is and what it tastes like and what it noses like. And then we'll put a splash of water in, and then it'll change the entire flavor profile.
Nice.
It's really a fascinating, and I think that's why I like it so much. There's just so many, it's kind of like people. There are so many different variations out there. Get to know each one of them. That's
course. No, I'm telling you right now that you're literally educating me for sure. And so I'm learning a lot. About a lot of times people go into the store and they just go, oh, that bottle looks pretty. I'll just buy that bottle. It looks cool. And I guess you can learn that way. You'll try, but you'll probably spend a lot more money. So speaking of spending money, I interviewed a guest a while back, Colonel retired, Brian Spanky Snyder. And he mentioned you when we were recording. And we almost kind of went to a different direction talking about a different subject, but somehow whiskey came up. And he was just like, I was sitting and enjoying this bottle of whiskey that my good friend Cary Amburn had bought for me. And I didn't realize until much later that bottle costed $150. And I was just like, wow, because after I had been hanging around with some of the folks that I was hanging around with, I started going from like just basic Crown Royal to some of the Glenlivets and the Glenfiddages and things like that. And my wine and whiskey budget was starting to rise up a little bit. And then, of course, my lovely bride, AKA Budget, said, hey, we need to bring you back down to this level a little bit. So what's the most that you think you've ever spent on a bottle of whiskey?
So personally, for me, probably $2.25, maybe $2.50 for a bottle.
Okay.
But I had a job when I was in Florida. I actually spent a year in Africa, and I came back, and I had about a 2-month period waiting to move to Langley. And a friend of mine, actually the guy who introduced me to Scotch, had a condo up in Cocoa Beach, and he let me live in his condo for rent-free for 2 months. And it was furnished. I mean, it was like living in an apartment on the water in Cocoa Beach.
Nice.
So as we were getting ready to leave, my boss, AKA the wallet, said, hey, you ought to buy, Tom, a bottle of whiskey. And I'm like, that's a great idea. So I go to the store, and I'm looking at $150, $180 bottle of whiskey. And she's like, well, I thought you would look behind the glass. And so sure enough, when I realized, he saved me about $3,500 a month. But we would have had to find somewhere because we weren't in the house. We had moved out. So I bought a bottle of 21-year Mortlock that I'd had. A good friend had introduced that to me as well, and it's like drinking butterscotch.
Oh, my gosh.
And so I laid that on the desk there in his condo, and about 30 days later, he'd gone back in after we had left, and he calls me up. He goes, hey, what do you know about this bottle of whiskey on my table? And I said, it must be really good. That was about, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was about $8.25.
Wow. So, but you know what?
$800, not bad.
In the grand scheme of things, based on the friendship, the relationship, the camaraderie, the team, everything that he had done for you, that's probably like a drop in the bucket, right? And so I think it's the sentiment of the gift. Which kind of brings me to my next point. I was going to ask you a very generic question, and I already know. In general, I was going to say, "Well, how does drinking whiskey make you feel?" Well, if somebody asked me that question, I would say it makes me feel good. but it's more to just sipping on some whiskey, right? Because you and I have shared drinks in Virginia, we've shared drinks in Florida, we've shared drinks in Africa together, and I know how that made me feel, not just the whiskey within itself, but just being in that environment.
So Shooter, that's a great kind of question to segue into the Squadron. So I'm one of those guys grew up in East Tennessee. I don't know that I touched any alcohol until I was in the Air Force. I don't recall. I had a couple friends in high school that would do stuff and just do it for the wrong reasons. And I would worry that, that's not who I am. And the same in college. I can remember going to parties and just, but I was in the Air Force and had gone to New Mexico. I was in a fighter squadron. And I enjoyed the camaraderie. And it's not because there was alcohol there. I think that kind of, let people kind of let their hair down. But I enjoyed that camaraderie, enjoyed that fellowship that we had. And I knew that that's kind of what I enjoyed about the Air Force. And so for me, that's what the drinking's about. It's about that social aspect. I rarely will drink to get drunk. That's just never the goal, right? You don't have to be out of control.
Right.
But I do enjoy that fellowship. You and I shared a beer in Ethiopia that I will never forget. There's just times, for me, it's all about that relationship. And I think that's probably the most important thing for me. That's why when we retired, we had this house and the basement became the Squadron. And I've got the crud table. I've got
nice.
I've got the part-time gym. I've got so it's all about that fellowship, and that makes me feel warm, right? When I have people, even if they're virtual in the Squadron, that's why I enjoy that.
That's pretty amazing. And I got to say, if you are lucky enough, if you're fortunate enough to have crossed paths with this gentleman here, then I would imagine that you have an opportunity to one day potentially actually visit the Squadron in real life. I know that's a big goal of mine, so I would love to step foot inside the Squadron because when dealing with such people as yourself, you always feel welcomed, even if it's via a text message or a cell phone call or whatever it may be. And I've seen you on your personal social media open the doors to the Squadron to folks that have been passersby. And so to me, I think that's very commendable. So go ahead.
I was just I thanks, but I think that's why we're here, right? We're on this great big ball to not be isolated and alone. It's about fellowship. It's about friendship. It's about mentorship. It's about learning both ways. I've learned equally from you, Shooter. You're an amazing individual, and it's I'm thankful that you're doing this podcast. It reaches people in a way that these new youngins can relate to.
Right.
But it's all good. I can't wait for you to be down here. Come through the Squadron.
I'm looking forward to it. On that note, in Tennessee, one of my former bosses, also a very great gentleman, very great leader as a whole, General Chad Radke. He once made me a Tennessee squire. And with becoming a Tennessee squire, you earn somewhat of a plot of land there in Tennessee. And I have still yet to visit the Tennessee Jack Daniel's Whiskey Distillery to visit my plot of land. Do you know what? I'm going to ask you this rhetorical question again. Do you know much about the Tennessee Squire Association, if you will?
Well, here's what I'll tell you, young whippersnapper. You are my squire grandson because Chad Radke is a squire because of me.
Oh, nice.
It's funny you say that. I'm very sentimental in all these kind of things. I actually wrote the Squire Club a note one time. I asked them to give me my genealogy, and it's kind of neat to track who I've squired and then who they've squired. So that's
I just learned on my own podcast who my Tennessee Squire grandfather is. I just learned right now. You heard it here first.
Well, you got to know where you come from.
That's right. That's right. Whiskey ancestry.
That's right. You got to know. It may not have. It may not be a 21andMe here in Tennessee. It may be a 2andMe or whatever we do down here in Tennessee. But yeah, so Jack Daniel's is, if you know the story, it's a great story. I highly recommend people go out and find the whole story of how Jack Daniel's got to be where it is today, because there's the story of Nearest Green that's woven in there that kind of got lost in time. And now that's a new whiskey up in Shelbyville, Tennessee, called Uncle Nearest, which is another fantastic whiskey.
Yes.
But Jack Daniel's has been making this whiskey forever. And Jasper Newton, Jack Daniels, the guy who is Jack Daniels, started this whiskey process, started making it, was a great marketeer, and got that out there. But it wasn't until the 50s that a guy named Frank Sinatra stood up on a stage one time and he made some statement. I don't know how it went. Something like, if you ain't got Jack in your glass, you're not doing it right. And that was probably the best advertisement the company could have ever gotten.
Wow.
But they formed this little club called the Squire Club. And now it's just the little fan club, if you want to call it a fan club. And I think Maker's Mark, they have, the ambassadors, everybody's got their little club. But they allow squires to then nominate up to 3 people a year, and just over time you kind of do that. So it's a little fun club, and then it's a neat way to keep track of people. That's what I like about it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, if you do visit the distillery, they have the Squire House, where I have personally left one of my little RMOs there. People leave patches, they leave parts of their history and lineage there, but highly recommend doing a tour of the distillery and visiting the Squire House, because you are a club card carrying member.
I have my card, and I'm just going to say I feel extremely honored now that I just discovered who my Squire grandfather is, and and not everybody could be a Squire. You just can't just say everybody. You've got to literally be nominated and all this other stuff. You get this certificate in the mail. It's pretty awesome. I got to tell you. And thanks for referencing Uncle Nearest as well. For those that are watching and listening, there's an amazing documentary out there about Uncle Nearest, so I highly recommend you go and check that out. I'll probably drop it in the show notes as well. So I can personally recall many times, actually, in one particular case, where you were just flooded with farewell gifts, just overall before, like you were just flooded. So I feel that is a true testament to how your people feel about you when they just continually flood you with gifts. But I also remember at one point in time where a lot of those gifts were whiskey, and I was just like, I think I remember you saying, like, what does that say about me?
I agree.
So I would imagine the price ranges were varying. We talked a little bit before about expensive whiskey versus inexpensive whiskey. And my answer to that is get what you can afford, right? So with all those gifts that you've been given and all those varying prices of whiskey that you've received, how many unopened bottles do you think you still have that you haven't finished?
Unopened? That's probably, I don't know, to be honest with you. I do know that I've converted. I don't know if I can, let me do this, see if I can do this. So I've converted.
Oh, nice.
So that's my call it whiskey cabinet. But we were doing some stuff a couple weeks ago, and Vicky said to the degree, like, how many bottles do you have? I don't know. So we started taking an inventory, and I think I got up to 122 bottles.
Nice.
And I would say maybe a fourth of them haven't been opened because just I buy something and it goes on a shelf, but and maybe not that many. But the intent is, a lot of people will collect bottles. Mm-hmm. I know Jack Daniel's will come out with like an Eric Church bottle, and people will buy that and put it up and save it for value. But for me, most of my bottles are cracked open and they're meant to be shared.
Right.
And I can't think. There's probably maybe 20, 25 bottles that are not open.
Okay.
But if you come down, shooter, pick one. If it's unopened, we'll open it, brother.
Oh, I like it.
No problem with that.
I like it. That sounds like a plan. I'm learning some self-discipline from you as well, because my bottles don't last that long around here. So I gotta make sure I preserve mine a little bit more. I try not to, because I do make more bravado about it, because I don't drink a whole lot, except on Fridays and Saturdays when the week is done. Then I'll have a couple of cocktails. I've rediscovered the old fashioned, which is a cocktail made of bourbon. Oh, yes.
Then I've kind of played with my own recipes, and so I've got an old fashioned which as a matter of fact, we'll probably be grilling out tonight. That I'll have a cocktail out by the grill while I'm making some steaks there. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it's not about losing control, but it's about that fellowship and that social aspect, and always in moderation.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
my daughter's probably going to see this. It's always moderation.
Always moderation. And, I think that's important to just reiterate once again, all things in moderation. We all have vices, for lack of better terms. But, I firmly believe in the whole work hard, play harder philosophy. But, you always have to throw safety in there as well, right? If you can be in the comfort of your own home and enjoy a drink amongst your friends and share in camaraderie, then what much more is there to ask for? And I don't think nothing's wrong with that whatsoever. So,
Totally.
sir, I want to ask you before we near the end here, because I know that you and I are part of at least one social media group with regard to whiskey drinkers. What kind of advice, recommendations do you want to leave with the people? Because I've got this whole list, and it's really because of the joy of trying different things aspect. I've got this list of whiskeys that I've tried over time, and I actually write them down and I collect them, like William Grant and Glenlivet and Highland Park, Balvenie, Jack Daniels, Dalwhinnie. The list goes on and on and on. Do you have any recommendations just for the standard whiskey connoisseurs out there?
Yeah. So here's what I would tell people: if you're serious about wanting to understand the spirit and understand how the different makes are out there, go do a little research and understand. There are basically 5, maybe 6, depending on how people define Scotland, but there's 5 areas where the whiskeys come from: the Highlands, the Lowlands, Speyside, Islay, and each one of those will have a different flavor kind of characteristic. You don't have to spend a lot of money to find out an Islay Scotch made in the land nearest the water in Scotland on the eastern coast will be very peaty, smoky, kind of tastes like a campfire put in a bottle. And then you'll go up into the mountains, into the Speyside of Scotland, and you will find where the water is just crisp clear, and the whiskeys, which tend to be ones that I like, Speyside. So I would tell people, go get educated on what's out there. Because like I said, there's the Scotch. You can get educated on the bourbons. There's an entire bourbon trail in Kentucky that you can go, from one side of the state to the other, kind of tasting different distilleries. But, be educated about it. Don't let other people tell you what's good and what's not good.
There you go.
Don't let them tell you can't drink it with ice. It's got to be neat. If I like it with ice, I like it with ice.
There you go.
But I would say be open-minded and try all varieties. And go, do I like it neat? Do I like it with water? Do I like it with ice? Do I like it? Because who knows what you like until you try it, right?
Nice. I like it. The best way, for those that are watching and listening, the best type of whiskey and the best way to enjoy said whiskey is what you like, how you like it. It is very, very simple. So thank you for all of that information, sir. I want to cheers you out and toast you up. But before we do that, I'm going to wrap you up here with my what do you prefer round. And this is a brand new round of questions for episodes within season 2. So I'm going to hit you with 10 questions. Are you ready for it?
Let's let them roll.
All right. With regard to pizza, commonly debated topic, fruit or no fruit?
No fruit.
No fruit. Okay. Basketball greatness, Michael Jordan or LeBron?
I'm a Jordan fan all the way.
Okay. Books, audio or paperback?
I'm kind of old school. I want a hardcover book.
Okay. You're going to laugh at this next one. Gym, leg day or arm day? And you already know which one I do.
So I mean, I know this isn't the rapid because we'll pause here, but I think you owe your audience a kind of rundown on the nicknames that Shooter, Simsation, Squat Leg Man, Squat. I mean, this guy's got more call signs. Matter of fact, when we left Africa, you got a run goose stick that said Captain Call Sign. I think that was your final call sign.
My final call sign was call sign because I had so many call signs. I literally, no kidding, just 2 weeks ago, just wrote in my paper, and the question was essentially, do you have a time where you made a mistake in a leadership position that you had to adjust to? And I bring that up because one of my call signs was mistake. You got faulty, you got OSFART, you got scanner, you got secret, you got squat rack, you got it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, but definitely leg day, right? That's important.
Which is something that I often skip. All right, so I know we're talking about whiskey on this episode, but with regard to libations, I'm not going to mention whiskey. Would you prefer to have a cocktail or wine?
Would I prefer? I would probably prefer a cocktail. Probably should drink more water, period. But yeah, probably a cocktail.
Okay. The way in which you communicate, do you like text messages or do you like, hey, I need you to give me a call?
I'm an old guy, man. Pick up the phone and call me.
Okay. Travel, road trip, hop on a plane.
God. See, I think I'm probably biased right now because I'm on a plane every week. So a road trip sounds nice.
Okay. Yeah, your travel schedule is pretty intense right now, so I can understand that. So maybe to coincide with that, then your attire. You prefer a t-shirt or a polo?
Oh, t-shirts, brother.
Okay. Heroes, Superman or Iron Man?
Ooh, yeah. I don't know.
One's supernatural, one's more man-made, technologically advanced, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I was always kind of a Batman guy, but which is kind of like an Iron Man, right? He's the old school Iron Man. He was kind of man-made. Yeah, so maybe Iron Man.
Okay. And last but not least, the world's universal language, music. Would you prefer vinyl or digital music?
Oh, yeah. So I'm not a true audiophile. Like I don't know that I can pick up, but there is something tactile about that album. On the turntable, the little pops and the snaps. There's something about that. Again, man, I'm just old. This is why.
You're not old. We're just young.
Yeah, that's right. There you go.
Well, listen, thanks for playing along with me, sir. And as always, I enjoy spending time with you. And so now I have the ability to share exactly what I tell everybody all the time here on this platform. So thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I wanna salute before we get out of here. And so it's always a pleasure. And to everybody that's tuning in with us, we appreciate you for your time. Until next time, I'm out.
See you, Shooter.